This story began with a simple visit. A son came to see his father at his old house on the outskirts of town. It was a typical yard of small-town America, overgrown with grass, shaded by trees, and seemingly frozen in time. Junk was scattered everywhere. Old appliances, dismantled tools, rusted wheels. And somewhere in that chaos, a long-forgotten legend had been hiding for years. The father had never mentioned that he once owned a 1969 Chevrolet Camaro. And not just owned, it had been sitting there for 30 years, literally behind the house, hidden behind a mountain of junk that no one ever touched. The answer to why would come later. But at that moment, as the son was clearing out the pile of debris near an old wall, he had no idea he was about to stumble upon a true classic of American automotive history. Beneath layers of plywood, old doors, and rotted tires, a corner of a chrome bumper peeked through the dirt. The more he cleared, the more the familiar shape of the body came into view. It was a Camaro rusted as if it had survived the apocalypse but still alive. The original paint was nearly gone, overtaken by rust. The glass was cracked, the hood had sunken into the ground, and the roof was covered in moss. It stood there as if forgotten by everyone, even by its own owner. When the son asked about it, the father simply waved his hand as if to say, "Don't bother, it's dead." And it was. The car hadn't started in decades. According to the father, the engine seized back when gas cost 90 cents a gallon. He didn't even want to hear about restoring it, said it was a waste of time, effort, and money. But that very indifference sparked something in the son, a determination to prove him wrong, not for the car, but for the principle. He decided he would bring the Camaro back to life no matter what it took. First, he had to clear the way. The car had practically grown into the earth. Under each wheel were layers of grass, mud, and roots. One tire was completely flat, and another was locked up due to a brake system that had rusted solid. The jacks wouldn't hold, so he had to use wooden blocks and a winch just to move the Camaro an inch. When the car finally gave in and shifted slightly forward, handfuls of leaves, twigs, and decades-old dust rained from it. The son called for a tow truck. That was a challenge of its own. The truck barely managed to get into the yard. They had to cut down some bushes, trim part of the fence, and then spend another hour dragging the Camaro onto the platform. The father stood aside, shrugging. His words were short and cold. "You're wasting your time. It'll never run again." And those words hit harder than any criticism. A tension hung between them. The son said nothing. He simply shut the tow truck door and drove off to his workshop. He was serious about it. The Camaro wasn't just an old car, it was a legend. And more than that, it was a piece of his father's history that he wanted to bring back to life. When the car was brought to the workshop, a whole new story began. By day work, by night Camaro. At first, he would just stand there and stare at it. Rust had devoured nearly the entire lower body, the wheel arches, rocker panels, door bottoms. The floor was so corroded that in some places you could see the shop floor through it. The interior was destroyed. Only scraps of foam remained from the upholstery, the steering wheel was split in half, and the instrument panel was covered in mold. Disassembly began with the engine bay. What he found was total disaster. The V8 engine that once roared was now practically cemented. The internal channels were clogged with hardened ancient oil, the valves were seized, and the pistons wouldn't budge. There was no chance of starting it. He had two options: replace the engine entirely or revive the original. He chose the second. On principle, it took nearly a day to pull the engine. Everything was held in place by rusted bolts that snapped one after another. The oil didn't drain, it fell out in chunks of black solid tar. After disassembling the block, he realized it wouldn't be easy. There were cracks in the cylinder head, and one piston had literally fused to the wall. But that only fueled his determination. This wasn't just a restoration anymore, it had become a challenge. At the same time, the search for parts began. Finding original components for a Chevrolet was like hunting. Some had to be ordered through collector forums. He tracked down a crankshaft in a junkyard in another state. He drove there himself, slept in his car because the seller suddenly refused to ship the part. Other parts, like the original SS badge for the grill he found on eBay from Canada. That badge alone cost almost as much as an old Corolla, but it gave the car its soul. There were plenty of moments when he felt like giving up. Once, while assembling the suspension, a spring popped out of place and slammed into a freshly repaired fender. Half a day went into fixing it. Another time, a new starter didn't fit. He had to return it and rework the mounting manually. And during the painting of one of the panels, the compressor broke down mid-process, causing the paint to go on in blotches. The whole job was ruined. But there were victories too. When he reassembled the engine and turned the crankshaft by hand for the first time, it moved. Not easily, not immediately, but it moved. When he added oil and saw the system build pressure, he smiled like a kid. The Camaro was coming back to life. Slowly, stubbornly, but it was. The body was treated separately, sandblasting, welding the floor, replacing the arches. Eventually, the time came to paint, and the son made a clear decision: the Camaro had to be red. A deep, rich, metallic red, not flashy, but confident. The kind of red that carried a story through it. He ordered the paint separately, spending a long time picking the perfect color code. And when the car came out of the booth for the first time in red, it was no longer a rusted relic of the past. It was a machine ready to return. But despite all the progress, the father never once called or asked how things were going. The son didn't tell him either. After that conversation in the yard, a wall of silence remained between them. And maybe it was that very silence that gave the son even more determination. After months of work, the most important night arrived, the engine start night. Everything was ready. A new battery, fresh wiring, a nearly rebuilt fuel system, a restored Holley carburetor that once sat on a Corvette. The spark plugs were matched exactly to the factory, 1969 spec. It felt as though the car itself had been waiting for this moment. The workshop was quiet, all connections checked, fuel flowing. The start button was pressed. One turn, silence. Second, a click. On the third, the engine coughed. And then, like thunder after a long stillness, the Vate roared to life. Rough, loud, smoky, but alive. The son couldn't hold back and slammed his fist on the table out of pure joy. All those nights, all those moments when he wanted to give up, they finally meant something. The next day, test drives began. The car still felt uncertain, the transmission was leaking, the coolant temperature kept spiking, and the brakes squealed, but all that was minor. The Camaro was moving on its own, under its own power, after 30 years of silence. And that's when the son decided it was time to go to his father. He arrived that evening. No call, no warning. Just pulled up slowly to the old house. The engine rumbled low, and the red body gleamed under the streetlights. He stopped in front of the house, shut off the engine, and stepped out. Neighbors peeked out their windows. A Camaro hadn't been seen on that street in decades. The father stood silently on the porch, staring at the car as if he were seeing a ghost. "What is this?" he finally asked. "It's your car, the same one," the son replied calmly, "and it's alive again." The father stepped down, ran his hand across the hood. His fingers trembled. He stayed silent for a long time, then looked at his son and said, "I never asked you to do this." "I know," the son answered, "but I did it anyway." "Why?" the father asked. And that's when it began. Old emotions burst to the surface. The father began to shout about how the car was cursed, how it once ruined his life, how he had poured so much money, effort, and nerves into it, and it still kept breaking down, that it almost cost him his family, that the Camaro wasn't a symbol of youth, but a reminder of failure. The son stood silently, but his eyes said it all. He didn't regret a thing. "I wasn't trying to bring back the car," he said quietly. "I was trying to bring back you." Those words hung in the air. The father looked away, turned without a word, and went inside, leaving his son alone with the silence. It was supposed to be a victory, but his heart felt heavy. The Camaro stood outside the house, a silent witness to old wounds that had never really healed. The son got in the car and drove away without looking back. What he didn't know was that behind the curtain, the father stood for a long time, watching the red taillights disappear into the night. A few days passed after that visit. The son didn't write, didn't call. He kept working on perfecting the Camaro, no longer in a rush. He installed new seats with original vinyl trim, added chrome moldings sourced from a restoration warehouse in Texas. The interior now smelled of fresh plastic, glue, and just a hint of the past. He installed a new audio system, but left the old analog radio, the same kind that once came with the car. From the outside, the Camaro looked like it had just rolled out of a showroom deep red metallic paint. Black accents on the hood, perfectly aligned seams, shining rally wheels. But inside, it carried more than just metal and gasoline. It carried a story broken and rebuilt, just like the bond between father and son. Then, one evening, the father showed up at the workshop. He simply walked in silently, just like he used to. His eyes immediately landed on the car. He didn't approach right away, almost as if he was afraid it would vanish if he touched it. The son placed the keys on the hood, said nothing, and stepped back. The father slowly walked up. His hand touched the paint. It was warm, as if the Camaro was breathing. He ran his palm across the hood, stopping at the SS emblem. He held his breath. "You know, I once dreamed of driving it down Route 66, he said softly. But life, well, he didn't finish. Then let's do it now, the son replied. The father laughed. Not sarcastically, but with that quiet sorrow of someone who's lost much, yet still has a chance to get something back. What, it even starts? He asked. Better than some people do in the morning, the son smiled, and he turned the key. One twist and the engine came to life. Smooth, deep, no smoke, no sputtering. The Camaro no longer resisted. It wanted to go. The father got into the passenger seat. He sat quietly, studied the dashboard, gently touched the door handle. The son pressed the gas, and the car slowly rolled out of the workshop. The road was dark and empty. The headlights lit the asphalt ahead, while behind them lay years of silence, broken phrases, and untold stories. They drove in silence for about 10 minutes. Then the father finally spoke. You know, back then, when I gave up, I hated myself for a long time. For breaking down, for abandoning it. That car reminded me I never finished what I started. And every time I looked out the window and saw that pile of scrap, I didn't think about the car. I thought about myself. He paused, inhaled deeply, and looked at his son. And you fixed that. Not just the Camaro, me. He didn't cry, but his voice trembled. And that was enough. The son said nothing. He simply shifted the Camaro into third gear and pressed the gas a little harder. The V8 responded with a roar confident, like a lion reclaiming its voice. That night, they just drove. No words, no destination. Just a father, a son, and an old car no longer a rusted symbol of failure. It had become a bridge, a memory. Proof that even something long abandoned can be brought back to life if you put your heart into it. The Camaro was alive again. But more importantly so was something far greater.